My wife took off her ring, declaring, "I'm going to find someone who appreciates my free spirit." I nodded. Then I hired a PI who documented her free-spirited encounters with multiple men. I presented this at our divorce mediation when she demanded spousal support. She got pennies. She was frantically calling her lawyer. I, 32M, never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office watching my wife's world crumble. But life has a funny way of serving justice when you least expect it. It started 6 months ago when she dramatically pulled off her wedding ring at our kitchen table and announced she was going to find someone who appreciated her free spirit. She said I was suffocating her dreams and that she needed to explore who she really was. I simply nodded and told her I understood. What she didn't understand was that I'd been married to her for 8 years. I knew her patterns, her tells, her sudden interest in yoga classes that ran suspiciously late, and her new wardrobe that seemed designed for someone half her age. The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was spray-painted in neon letters. Instead of begging or fighting, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired Marcus, a private investigator my divorce attorney had recommended. The retainer hurt my savings, but something told me it would be worth every penny. She moved into our guest bedroom that same week, claiming she needed space to think. I watched her pack her things with the same detached curiosity I'd have observing a nature documentary. She was so focused on her newfound freedom that she didn't notice me documenting everything. The sudden disappearances, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd return home with that particular glow that had nothing to do with exercise. Marcus was thorough in ways that both impressed and disgusted me. Within 2 weeks, he'd identified her first companion, a yoga instructor from her studio. Married, 2 kids, completely unaware that his spiritual awakening partner was also married. The photographs Marcus captured showed them in his car, in parking lots, at a motel on the outskirts of town that charged by the hour. But that was just the beginning. The second man appeared barely a week after the first. A bartender at the upscale restaurant where she'd started having her girls' nights out. Marcus documented their encounters with the precision of a scientist studying behavior patterns. Hotel receipts, text messages she'd carelessly left visible through windows, timestamps that created an undeniable timeline of deception. By the third man, a married neighbor from 2 streets over, I realized I wasn't just dealing with someone exploring their free spirit. I was watching a woman systematically destroying multiple families while painting herself as some kind of liberation hero. She came home one evening, glowing with what I now recognized as post-affair satisfaction, and told me she'd figured things out. She said she wanted a divorce, but she hoped we could keep things amicable. After all, she'd contributed to our household and deserved to be taken care of during her transition to independence. I told her that sounded reasonable and asked if she had a lawyer in mind. She seemed surprised by my cooperation, but pleased. She probably thought I was going to roll over and make this easy for her. Marcus's final report arrived on a Tuesday. 43 pages of documented infidelity with photographic evidence, financial records showing hotel charges on our joint credit card, and a timeline that read like a masterclass in deception. 3 different men, multiple encounters, and enough evidence to make any divorce attorney salivate. The best part? She had no idea any of it existed. Update 1. The mediation was scheduled for the following month. She spent those weeks planning her new life, talking about the apartment she'd found, the art classes she wanted to take, the writing workshop that would help her discover her authentic voice. She'd transformed from a cheating spouse into some sort of Renaissance woman in her own mind. I played my part perfectly. Concerned husband trying to do right by his soon-to-be ex-wife. I asked about her plans, nodded sympathetically when she talked about how difficult this transition would be for her, and even offered to help her move her things when the time came. Meanwhile, my attorney was preparing for war. The morning of mediation, she dressed like she was attending a job interview for CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Power suit, professional demeanor, the works. She'd clearly rehearsed her talking points about spousal support, division of assets, and her need for financial stability while she rebuilt her life. We sat across from each other at a polished conference table with our respective lawyers and the mediator. She opened with what I can only describe as a performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. She talked about sacrifice, commitment, and how she'd supported my career at the expense of her own dreams. She'd calculated spousal support based on maintaining her current lifestyle for at least 5 years. Her lawyer presented documents outlining her position. They were asking for 60% of our assets, the house, and monthly support that would essentially fund her freedom tour indefinitely. I listened with the patience of someone holding a royal flush, while everyone else argued over pocket pairs. When it was my turn to respond, I told the mediator I had some concerns about my wife's ability to demonstrate the stability necessary for such a significant financial commitment. I suggested we might want to review some additional documentation before proceeding. That's when my lawyer opened his briefcase. The first photograph hit the table like a bomb going off in a library. Her face went white as she stared at herself wrapped around her yoga instructor in the front seat of his Honda Civic. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. But we weren't done. The second photo showed her leaving the downtown motel with the bartender. The third captured her passionate goodbye kiss with our neighbor. Each image was dated, time-stamped, and accompanied by corresponding credit card receipts that she'd charged to our joint account. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her lawyer was flipping through the documents with the expression of someone watching their case evaporate in real time. Marcus's timeline was a thing of beauty. It showed that during the same period she was claiming to need space to find herself, she was actually conducting a systematic exploration of the local married male population. The financial records revealed she'd spent over $3,000 on hotels, dinners, and lingerie, all charged to our marital credit cards. The mediator cleared his throat and asked if she had any response to the documentation. She finally found her voice and started talking about how these encounters were part of her journey of self-discovery, how they didn't change her right to spousal support, how I was obviously trying to humiliate her. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Update 2. The mediation took a very different turn after that. Suddenly, my wife's demands for spousal support and majority asset division seemed less reasonable. Her lawyer requested a recess to confer with his client, and I could hear heated whispers coming from the hallway. When they returned, her entire demeanor had changed. The confident woman who'd walked in demanding her fair share was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they'd been caught shoplifting at a church bake sale. Her lawyer presented a revised proposal that was significantly more modest. They were now willing to accept a 50-50 asset split and minimal spousal support. My attorney responded by presenting additional documentation: text messages recovered from phone records, witness statements from hotel staff, and financial analysis showing how much she'd spent on her extramarital activities using our joint funds. The most damaging piece was a recorded conversation Marcus had captured between her and the bartender, where she explicitly discussed her strategy for maximizing her divorce settlement while maintaining her relationships with all three men. She'd actually bragged about having the best of both worlds: financial security and romantic freedom. At this point, the mediator suggested that given the overwhelming evidence of marital misconduct and misuse of joint funds, we might want to consider a different approach to asset division. He noted that courts in our state take a dim view of spouses who use marital assets to fund extramarital relationships. Her lawyer requested another recess. This time, I could hear her voice rising in the hallway as she demanded to know why he hadn't prepared her for this possibility. His response was something about how she'd failed to disclose the extent of her extramarital activities during their initial consultation. When they returned, she looked defeated. Her lawyer presented what he called their final offer: a 40-60 asset split in my favor, no spousal support, and she would assume responsibility for the credit card debt she'd incurred during her period of self-discovery. I told them I needed to discuss it with my attorney. My lawyer and I stepped into the hallway, where he congratulated me on one of the most thorough documentation jobs he'd ever seen. He said that if this went to court, I'd likely receive an even better settlement, but mediation would save time and legal fees. I told him I wasn't interested in destroying her completely. I just wanted to make sure she understood that actions have consequences. We agreed to accept the revised terms with one addition. She would sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing the details of our marriage or divorce publicly. When we returned to the conference room, I accepted their offer. She signed the documents with shaking hands while her lawyer looked like he was questioning his career choices. The most satisfying moment came when she realized that her carefully planned transition to independent living just became significantly more challenging. Instead of the comfortable lifestyle she'd envisioned, funded by spousal support, she was looking at starting over with minimal assets and a mountain of credit card debt. Update 3. The final paperwork was completed within 2 weeks. She moved out on a Saturday morning with significantly fewer belongings than she'd expected to take. I helped her load her car, not out of kindness, but because I wanted to witness the final chapter of this particular story. As she was putting the last box in her back seat, she asked me why I hadn't fought for our marriage. She said she never expected me to just give up without trying to win her back. I told her that people show you who they are, and I'd learned to pay attention. I said that someone who could systematically deceive their spouse while planning to financially benefit from that deception had revealed exactly who they were, and I was simply responding accordingly. She tried to explain that her affairs were about finding herself, not about hurting me. I pointed out that she'd hurt 3 other families in her journey of self-discovery, and that her freedom had come at the expense of multiple marriages and several children who would now grow up in broken homes. That seemed to hit her in a way the divorce proceedings hadn't. She'd been so focused on her own liberation that she hadn't considered the collateral damage. Her phone started ringing as she was getting into her car. She answered it frantically, and I could hear her lawyer's voice through the speaker. Apparently, the yoga instructor's wife had somehow obtained copies of our mediation documents and was now filing her own divorce proceedings. The bartender's spouse had already contacted an attorney, and our neighbor's wife had started asking very pointed questions about his recent absences. She hung up and looked at me with something approaching panic. She asked if I'd shared the investigation results with anyone else. I told her that the truth has a way of coming out, regardless of who shares it. I mentioned that in small communities, people talk, and that 3 different families asking questions simultaneously tends to create connections. As she drove away, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not satisfaction or revenge, but actual peace. The uncertainty was over, the lies were exposed, and I could finally start rebuilding my life based on truth instead of managing someone else's deceptions. The house felt different that evening. Not empty, but honest. No more wondering where she really was or why her stories never quite added up. No more pretending I believed her explanations or managing my own suspicions. 6 months later, I ran into the yoga instructor's ex-wife at the grocery store. She thanked me for the documentation that had helped her secure a favorable settlement in her own divorce. She mentioned that she'd connected with the bartender's ex-wife, and they'd started a support group for spouses who'd been deceived by the same person. I learned that my ex-wife had moved 3 towns over and was working as a substitute teacher. Her dreams of art classes and writing workshops had apparently collided with the reality of supporting herself on a limited income while paying down credit card debt. The neighbor's marriage had survived, though they'd moved to a different state for a fresh start. His wife had decided that transparency and counseling were preferable to divorce, but only after he'd provided full disclosure about the extent of his involvement. I've started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. The experience taught me the value of paying attention to actions rather than words, and the importance of trusting my instincts when something feels off. Looking back, I realized that the moment she took off her ring and declared her intention to find someone who appreciated her free spirit, she'd actually done me a favor. She'd told me exactly who she was and what she intended to do. I just chose to listen and respond accordingly. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's simply allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their choices while protecting yourself from the fallout. She got exactly what she asked for: complete freedom to explore her authentic self. She just discovered that freedom comes with a price tag she hadn't anticipated.